afternoon, colleagues in the House of Assembly, colleagues in the other place, members of staff of Parliament, members in the gallery, the press. This second meeting of the Joint Select Committee of the Committee on the Integrity and Public Life Bill 2018 is now convened. The minutes have been circulated, and I'm taking that they have been read. Can we have a motion? Motion from Senator Franklin that the minutes be approved. Do we have a seconder?
Motion seconded, Chair.
Seconded by Senator Cummings. Are there any matters arising? There being none, I'd like to move swiftly into the proceedings today, but I would like to begin with just a few remarks. I've already welcomed you to this meeting. Let me say that I'm very happy that this meeting of this select committee is being streamed live and on social media. It is important that the public has every opportunity to engage in this kind of process. The Integrity in Public Life Bill is one that is a cornerstone of this administration, and we feel that every opportunity should be given to the public to participate in this kind of parliamentary process. To date, we have had 14 written submissions, and 7 individuals have indicated their wish to make oral presentations before the committee. The life of this committee is 3 months, and therefore it means we will have to work with some dispatch. I think everyone knows what we are talking about when we talk about corruption. It takes many forms, but for the purposes of our Integrity and Public Life Bill, corruption has been defined by Transparency International as the use of public office for private gain. And I think that everyone will readily agree that this has been a hot button subject for all of Barbados in recent months throughout the last election, and certainly since the Barbados Labour Party has taken administration. And recent events, well known to Barbadians, have served to underscore the significance of our government grappling with the issue of corruption in the earliest and strongest possible way. We look forward to public participation. We still have more Barbadians who are interested, and we encourage you to come forward. I would like to say in your numbers, but bearing in mind that our life is only 3 months, it would present a difficulty for us to hear everyone. But please do continue to submit your written memoranda so that we could consider them as we look at the bill. This is not a commission of inquiry of any kind. This is a select committee drawn from members of both houses of Parliament, and our purpose and are set out in the terms of reference. And quite simply, it is to look at the bill as is drafted to see if it will achieve the purposes that are expected of it. We are honored to have one of the region's finest jurists and one of the finest legal minds who has agreed to address this committee, and I speak of none other than Sir David Simmons. Sir David Simmons needs no introduction, but he eagerly accepted our invitation to address this committee on matters relating to the integrity of public life and on matters relating to his own work in a similar environment and with similar legislation in the Turks and Caicos Islands. So David, I welcome you to this committee, and please, the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Attorney General, members of the committee, senators, and members of Parliament. Good afternoon to you, and the clerks at the table. I'm not not sure what you said about me before I came, or put it another way, behind my back. I couldn't hear in the room where they had me.
Nothing that you should at all worry about. If anything, you should be blushing.
That's impossible with this color. Did you mention, sir, that for the last 8 years, I have had responsibility in the Turks and Caicos Islands as chairman? Okay. Thank you very much. Good. Well, let me thank you, sir, for inviting me to address the Select Committee. I hope that the experience that I've had in the Turks and Caicos Islands will be of some assistance to the committee. It began in April 2010, just after I officially retired as Chief Justice of Barbados. I was invited by the governor of the Turks and Caicos Islands, a gentleman I didn't know, to come and establish the Integrity Commission for the Turks and Caicos Islands. All they had was legislation similar to the bill that is before the Select Committee now. 6 of us were appointed commissioners, and the Turks and Caicos Islands were in a very parlous state financially. So we were established with very little funding and no human resources. It was a massive task. There was a gentleman from England sent out by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Mr. Keith Sargent, who assisted the commissioners and the one secretary we had in establishing this commission. So we took it from scratch, as is going to happen here in Barbados once this legislation is passed. And it has grown over the years to the point where in the first week of June this year, it was held at a Commonwealth Secretariat organized conference in the TCA for institutions similar to the Integrity Commission as the template for others to follow. Indeed, we may be aware, sir, that about September, October last year, the new Prime Minister of the Bahamas announced, and it was carried regionally, that the Bahamas were going to establish an Integrity Commission and follow the legislation of the Turks and Caicos Islands. Well, of course, there are other integrity commissions in the region. Trinidad has had one for a long set of years. Jamaica has had one, Dominica, and so on. The time is surely right for Barbados to follow suit, if only for 2 reasons that should touch and concern us all in April this year. As a global scourge, corruption is attracting the attention of world leaders and the international financial institutions. The Summit of Americas, as you all know, was held in Peru in April this year. And the hot topic was how governments can combat corruption at the highest level throughout the Americas, and that would include us. In the same month of April this year, the International Monetary Fund that we are dealing with now promulgated a framework for enhanced engagement with countries on governance and corruption issues. And the objective, according to the release from the IMF, is to ensure that issues of corruption are dealt with, and I quote, systematically, effectively, candidly, and in a manner that reflects uniformity of treatment, unquote. And I think we can all expect that when the IMF conducts their usual Article 4 reviews of countries, in future it will probably comment on actual or perceived corruption within a particular country. So it behoves us to start to put our house in order, to align ourselves with the rest of the world and the best practices that are being developed to enhance good governance. I suppose historically, it would appear that there has been apathy towards corruption in the region, and the reasons may be located in a number of phenomena, such as fear of victimization. In our small societies, there exists a real fear of victimization, which is heightened because of an absence of whistleblower legislation. Secondly, of course, there have been few prosecutions for corruption, and people are seen to get away with it, and that itself leads to apathy among the population. So people become indifferent to corruption and feel powerless to do anything about it. Thirdly, there is clearly a lack of investigative journalism among the newspapers in the region. And before we are too quick to criticize them, I think we should recognize that this may be the result of a lack of financial resources among the media, or it may itself reside in a fear of victimization among the journalists. But to compound the problems for journalists is the fact that few countries, Jamaica certainly accepted, but few countries have freedom of information legislation. And I suppose governments delight in denying their public the right to access to information held by the government, when in fact very little of government information is so secret that the public can't know about it. And finally, perhaps there has been the role of the private sector in contributing to apathy towards corruption. Corruption in the public sector is a direct consequence of willing, greedy, and corrupt persons in the private sector. There's big money in government contracts, everyone knows that. And where election campaign financing is non-existent, if legislation for election campaigning is non-existent, and public procurement legislation is toothless, I don't think it is fanciful to suggest that financiers of election campaigns of parties expect that if the donees of their funds are successful, they will have access to lucrative government contracts. These attitudes have developed over such a long time that they're almost part of the culture of life in this region. I wish to explain to the committee that I think the Turks and Caicos Islands provide an interesting and opposite case study about the consequences of corruption, and then how can you attempt to redress that scourge. The Turks and Caicos Islands, of course, as some of you know, since 1976 have had several commissions of inquiry with a very high-powered chairperson, such as Sir Louis Blum Cooper. And the most recent, of course, was Lord Justice Robin Hall. He was a one-man commission of inquiry that investigated and reported in 2008, 2009. But I think it's important to look at the economy of the Turks and Caicos Islands. Between 2000 and 2008, the Turks and Caicos experienced economic growth, which was said to be among the highest in the world, according to the UK National Audit Office. And there was a lot of overseas investment, and one of the islands, Providenciales, was the main beneficiary of that investment and is transformed as a result of the investment. But that development came at a cost to the people of the Turks and Caicos Islands, because what were essentially crown lands were used by members of the government for on sale to developers, particularly Europeans, and for which members of the government got handsome kickbacks. And without going into the details, which aren't really relevant for this inquiry, let me just say that Lord Justice Auld, in his report, made a stinging indictment of the quality of governance in the Turks and Caicos Islands, from the Premier back down. And having done the Commission of Inquiry, which was able to identify a large number of dubious transactions, let me put it no higher than that, a large number of dubious transactions involving ministers, the Premier, and attorneys at law. So Robin was careful not to make specific findings of corruption. Instead, he used language that was so couched as to leave it open to the imagination, but at the same time, to create a platform for investigation. And you would use words, for example, like, this particular transaction requires further investigation to determine whether there was in fact corruption. Now, the British government took that report, created a special investigation team led by Helen Garlick, Senator Tate may remember Helen Garlick, here was an Honorable Mr. Thorne. She had addressed the bar many years ago, and her husband. She put together the team with Scotland Yard personnel, and they went through each area that Sir Robin pointed to, and eventually charged a large number of public officials, from the Premier, as I said, to lawyers even in private practice. And they're before the court still. The case has been going on for a few years now, very well. In the meantime, Sir Robin had identified a few developers who had influenced members of the government corruptly. And because the TCI, this is now about 2012, did not have the financial capability to continue high-level prosecutions, to carry the cost of further prosecutions. Deals were done with some of these developers, and they paid back the government, in one case, $12.5 million US. And that was in exchange for not being prosecuted. So that the government got money. What has happened is that whereas at one time, around 2008, 2009, the economy seemed to have been booming, so much was sucked out of the economy by way of corruption that 2012, 2013, and so on, things were very, very bad. And our commission started work, and I'll tell you some of the things we did, and I hope to see happen here. And gradually, with a different environment for the functioning of government, there has been a resurgence in the economy, so that, let me give you an idea. The last 3 years have seen not deficits as were the norm between, say, 2010 and 2015, but now surpluses. But we're talking about about 10 islands and 35,000 people. So you're not talking big money, but it is an important point of principle for a government to move from a situation of persistent deficits to one where in the last 3 years, each year we're reporting surpluses, $35, $60 million, $38 million, that kind of thing. So there, and no study has been done, and it would be quite improper for me to assume that the Integrity Commission has had a direct consequence in the change of economic and fiscal fortunes in the Turks and Caicos Islands. What I can say is that the public is aware of us, that the Commission has been working throughout all of the islands, carrying a message from the schools. If you go on our website, you will see there's a competition going on. I think it's still going on now among schools about integrity and corruption and so on. So we've started in the schools. And when the commission was able to get financial resources and human resources, we started to organize it. See, in the bill here, clause, it's a bill. Clause 4 of the bill sets out the functions of the commission. And just running through them quickly. The first one is to keep on record all declarations, statements of registrable interest, and reports of gifts forwarded by persons in public life. So we are, first of all, a repository for the safekeeping of declarations and statements of registrable interest. Whenever this commission is established, that has to be a function that is populated. We have to find 1 or 2 persons, data entry people, and so on, to do that. Secondly, to examine declarations, statements of registrable interest, and reports of gifts, etc. This is the compliance aspect of the commission's functions. And this is where now you have to ensure that you have on your staff, I would have thought, a minimum of 2, possibly 3 accountants, because when a declaration is filed, those members of staff have to go through that declaration and see whether it makes sense, if they're being carried wide, and if they need to pursue aspects of the declaration by checking in the land registry or the corporate affairs registry or wherever. I'm not going to go into the modalities of investigation, but the compliance section, it is not just that you have filed. Filing is one thing, but it is the content of what you have filed that is important, because you may be, as I said, carrying the commission wide, misleading them. Thirdly, to make inquiries and carry out investigations in order to verify or determine the accuracy of a declaration. You may require a financial analyst to assist with that. And then, fourthly, to receive, inquire into, and investigate any complaint or report of an alleged contravention of the Act or the Code of Conduct. And that is the investigatory function of the commission. You need 3 or 4 top investigators, preferably who have skills in the investigation of white-collar crime and who can investigate numbers. There will also need to be general investigators, because members of the public make complaints to the commission as is required in writing, and those complaints have to be investigated. Now, I wish to suggest to the committee that you want an entity separate and distinct from the police force. Separate and distinct from the police force. The police force will not have the time or the manpower to do the kind of investigation that is required for an integrity commission. We have the Royal Turks and Caicos Police Force, but the commission itself recruits through a very transparent, elaborate process. When we want staff, they're put on the website, they're put on several different websites. But the quality of person that we have got are retired officers who served in SOCA in Scotland Yard. SOCA is Serious Organized Crime Agency of Scotland Yard. Very high-powered people. The problem, I have to confess, the problem is that they don't stay long. They come for 2 years, and then they go. Turks and Caicos is a small community, and so on. But that's the quality of person who has worked in financial crime investigation in London, with Scotland Yard. That's the kind of person that we have had working with us. And they investigate whether it's crime or indeed whether there are breaches of the code of conduct. I see the bill makes provision for the development of a code of conduct. I am aware that in the Public Service Act of 2007, there is a code of conduct, I believe, for public officers. We have one. This is what it looks like. This is the one for the Turks and Caicos. I am not enamored of it. A lot of it was done by the British government, sent down in a hurry to meet the election of 2012. But it is a guide. I'm sure we in Barbados can develop one that is far better than that. But you have to have a code of conduct for ministers and members of parliament. I don't know if they still do it. When I first went to the cabinet in 1985, the cabinet secretary, the first day I went, gave me, I think, 3 pages of paper with the do's and don'ts that you did not do or you did as a cabinet minister. I don't know if they still have it, if they still give new ministers, but that was a little code that we had at the time. I think they repeated it in '86. I can't remember, but having given me once or twice, they would not have given me again. But I don't know if the new members of parliament get it, but it should be. If you haven't ever seen it, you should ask. It has to be on some file up there. It's useful, but it's not full. Sir, I would wish to recommend, however, that the functions itemized at 4.1A to H can perhaps be enlarged by one more. The bill does not make any specific statement about public education. But I would wish to offer or to proffer the suggestion that we should include, by way of amendment, an additional paragraph to put it beyond doubt that one of the core functions of the commission will be to promote and advance the objects of this bill by means of public education. Don't just leave it to chance. It was not in the TCI legislation. We did it by administrative action. Brought on a person to be the public education officer and created a little department. But I would prefer to see it as a specific responsibility of the commission set out in law. I understand that some member of the public was concerned that Clause 9 says that the commission may designate a person employed under Section 8.1 as an investigative officer and issue a warrant. And somebody thought that the commission could not function with one investigative officer, and that is quite true. But what the critic ought to remember is that in the Interpretation Act, the singular includes the plural. So this only means that you can employ investigative officers. The fact that it says a doesn't limit you to one person. If you want to change it to put it beyond doubt, you could say may designate such persons as investigative officers. But really it is a trite point of law. I am going to make a few more comments, sir, about the bill, and then perhaps it will be more useful if members of the committee ask me specific questions and I can answer them. Now, what is being done through this bill will constitute a sea change in the culture of public affairs in Barbados. It will require MPs, ministers, members of the Senate, magistrates, permanent secretaries, the list that is set out in the schedule. Every 2 years, spend a little time, probably a day, filling up, getting together some information and filling up the form. Since this has never been done before, there is going to be an instinctive reaction that somehow government is trying to pry into people's personal affairs and intruding. Let me say first of all that is why you need a public education program, properly funded and resourced, to explain to people why this is necessary. And then to go beyond that and to give the assurance that the provisions in this bill relating to secrecy and confidentiality are meant to bolster confidence in the system. From the time you file your declaration, in the Turks, the compliance staff see it. Nobody else. It is scanned onto a server. That server, the software is encrypted. Only people who have access to that server are the compliance officers, not the director, not the chairman, none of us as commissioners. And there is a penalty once you join the staff, and in fact, starting with the commissioners, all of us have to take oaths as to secrecy, and we are liable to prosecution for breach. And we have to, as I say, make the persons in specified persons in public life who are listed in the schedule feel confident that the disclosure of their financial and other information will be kept secret. We only, as commissioners, see a declaration where there is an inquiry and the staff has not been satisfied with the answers and with the answers to questions. And we have an inquiry, and we've had several inquiries. And that's the first time we see it, and of course we give back the papers at the end of a meeting. That's it. I think members appreciate that the bill draws a distinction between the reporting requirements of people in public life and the reporting requirements for members and staff of the commission. We can't report to ourselves as commissioners, so we report to the governor of the Turks and Caicos Islands, fill up our forms and give them to him. Other people report to the commission. I mean, this structure is set out in the bill. Now, Part 5 of the bill deals with the registration of interest. And it only means that where, as a person in public life, and in fact, it is limited to members of the House of Assembly and members of the Senate. You file with the Commission a statement of registrable interest, and it tells you in section 38(1) the contents of the registrable interest, what it's aimed at. It wants to know if you have directorships in a company, and if so, you just state the name of the company, director of XYZ Limited, because it doesn't require you, when you register your interest, to give the amounts of anything. So you don't have to say, I have $20,000 in mutual funds, or money at the credit union, $50,000 in public workers credit union, anything, no details. Subsection 2, nothing in this section shall be taken to require disclosure of the actual amount or extent of any financial benefit, contribution, or interest. If you have a contract with the government, you want it, you mention that, so that is declared, just as if you're a director of a company and you're involved in a contract with the Companies Act would require you to disclose the fact of that contract at a meeting of the board. And the various interests are set out there. Again, the compliance unit checks the register, your declarations, and I must say that in the Turks we have had 100% from the members of parliament up there, everybody that registers their interests. And indeed, every parliamentarian in the Turks files declarations, general declarations as required. In fact, while we anticipated that there would have been some resistance after we were set up because of what you were seeking to have disclosed, financial matters and so on, it has turned out to be a most heartening experience. The latest one is not as good as before, but I have the latest figures here for June the 30th, 2018, the intake. There are 242 persons who should have filed declarations. As at the 30th of July, 194 had filed out of 242. That was 80%. And the 48 who had not filed, there are excuses for about 20 of them having to do with being appointed to boards midstream and so on. They weren't there for 2 years, a year, or whatever. 5 of them currently live abroad and they requested an extension of time. And one was very ill and she asked for a 90-day extension. But 80% is the lowest that we've had. But as I say, I'm sure that will get back up to near 90. By the time we deal with those who have had special circumstances that militated against their filing on time. One of the features of this legislation is Part 7, Clause 49 and following. So far as persons in public office are concerned, it has always been a crime at common law from about 1758 in the case of Bembridge. It has always been a crime to misconduct yourself in public office. You don't have to wait for legislation now. This creates a separate set of legislation, but the common law always had the common law misdemeanor. So you could punish somebody who misconducted themselves in public life for a crime in 2016, 2017. That is a common law. This legislation builds and adds to the common law. It creates a number of statutory offenses by conduct which is classifiable as corrupt, including conflict of interest situations. And the lawyers here understand when a conflict of interest situation arises. It is where you have a public duty to perform and you allow your private interests to conflict with that public duty. So you have a public duty accepting that ministerial office requires you to give up any private practice you had as a lawyer or a doctor and devote your full time selflessly to ministerial office. But you're doing that and also privately on the side running another business and you are down there at that business 3-4 hours a day, your private interest in that business is now conflicting with your public duty, your public ministerial duty. That can't happen in this legislation because you may be caught by Section 51D. Knowingly or reckless, knowingly is one offense, recklessly is another, of course. Allowing your private interest to conflict with your public duties, that's one, or to improperly influence his conduct in the exercise of his functions as a public official. And give an example from a real case in the Turks and Caicos. We prosecuted the Deputy Commissioner of Police at Turks Island. There was a murder some years before. His son was suspected of being involved in the murder. Investigations started. He was instructed by the commissioner not to have anything to do with the investigation because his son was involved. He still interfered. And we sent the matter to the DPP. DPP put him before the court. They had a jury. And in a small society, with a jury from that society, although he said that he was warned and he was told by the commissioner not to involve himself, but he said, but it was my son, so I got involved. And they let him go. They let him go. But in that small society, we also have legislation that has abolished trial by jury in certain cases, so that the premier and the ministers and the attorneys who were involved in all the alleged fraudulent deals, they're before one judge, no jury. I believe there has been an issue ventilated in the public domain about the level of the fines provided in Section 54(1). I do not believe that these represent the original draft, but these fines are too low. The lawyers here will recall that when the then government, the Democratic Labour Party government in 1994, before the election, enacted the, it was called Drug Misuse and Prevention Act. The penalties is Chapter 131 of the laws, as I recall it. The penalties were stiffened for possession and trafficking in drugs and so on. You know what penalties that legislation contained? Some as high as $500,000 and 20 years imprisonment, or both, and others 250,000. So there has been occasion when we have legislated very, very heavy penalties. This is a matter of policy for the members of this committee and Parliament generally to determine what is an appropriate level, but I would think that this is not a deterrent, either a specific deterrent for some of the players or a general deterrent for members of the public generally who might be tempted to bribe somebody or commit one of these corrupt offenses.
Now, of course, in small societies, idle gossip and rumor and just naked nastiness, cussedness, what President Trump has classified as fake news, can do a lot of damage. And in the legislation, it is provided that a person who maliciously makes a false allegation, Clause 59, or provides false information suggesting that somebody has acted in breach of the act, is himself guilty of an offense, and if it's before a jury, 20,000 or 2 years or both, before a magistrate, 10,000 or 2 years or both. That is meant to deter officious busybodies and others from filing vexatious or false reports. One of the functions of the commission is to hold inquiries into complaints, maybe an allegation of a conflict of interest, as we do from time to time in Turks. It's a kind of informal, it's informal in terms of the procedure. We do not treat ourselves as hidebound by the rules of evidence, but we allow for representation of the public official by a friend or by an attorney at law. And you will see that in this bill, adequate provision is made to ensure fairness. That, in other words, that no decision is to be made that is adverse to a public official unless he has had or she has had the opportunity to put his side or her side of the story, an opportunity to be heard in accordance with the basic principles of natural justice. Turning to the schedule, sir, I have a concern about, in the first schedule, paragraph 4, subparagraph 1, appointment of chairman. I do not agree that the Governor General should be allowed to appoint the chairman of the commission acting in her discretion. This is too important a body that is to be staffed by, be headed by a person who has held the office of judge in a superior court of record in any part of the Commonwealth. If paragraph 1B is correct, then paragraph 4.1 cannot be correct. Paragraph 4.1b says, the commission shall consist of, quote, a person who holds or has held the office of judge in a superior court of record in any part of the Commonwealth, appointed by the Governor General, after consultation with the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. I prefer that to read upon the advice of the Prime Minister after consultation with the Leader of the Opposition, just as your point, Judge, Chief Justice, no. But then, having provided for that consultation, you say here in 4.1, the Governor General shall, acting in his discretion, appoint a member to be chairman. That is confusing. So I would prefer if 4.1 is deleted. I would recommend that. It's for the committee to decide. And leave 1B, paragraph 1B, with a tweak of the language, appointed by the Governor General upon the advice of the Prime Minister after consultation with Leader of the Opposition. Let those two discuss this judge and recommend to the Prime Minister, to the Governor General, who then appoints, just as you do with the appointment of a judge.
And so, David, you're proposing that that person should be the chairman?
Oh, yeah, well, there can be no doubt that a legally qualified person, you've limited it here to the office of a judge. On the other hand, this could be further amended to provide for a judge or an attorney at law of, say, not less than 20 years standing. The chairman has to be a legally qualified person. There can be no again saying that, because the work of the commission, in particular in the area of inquiries, requires somebody who understands about evidence, who is able to make determinations and guide the commission as to findings of fact, and deal with legal issues that will arise. Whenever I do an inquiry, they're high-powered lawyers taking technical points that I have to help. The two of us who are lawyers on the commission in the Turks. And Mr. Martin Green is an excellent lawyer, just the two of us. But on the occasions when he has not been there, I may be hearing an inquiry with, the other lay members. It is absolutely critical that the chairman must be a legally qualified person. The final point I wish to make by way of my introductory remarks, Honorable Attorney General, is that this legislation must be part of a package. It cannot exist on its own. It cannot adequately do the job. We agree that there must be a code of conduct developed which will provide for sanctions for breach of the code. Now, in the Turks, there is a provision in their constitution which we on the commission have been fighting for the last 8 years without any success, because the British government just refuses to amend the constitution. But where a minister in the Turks is found guilty in breach of the code, he must relinquish ministerial office. And it doesn't specify for how long. I suppose technically you can find him guilty and say he shall cease to be a minister. We can make the order as a commission. He shall cease to be a minister for the next 6 months. Equally, you can say for the balance of the parliamentary term. The British, we have made a representation to the British government that you need gradations of sanctions. You need to be able to provide for perhaps a reprimand, suspension, or something like that. But it is almost like a judge who is found by a tribunal to have been guilty of misconduct. However small, however egregious, doesn't matter. He must be removed from office. And the Privy Council commented negatively on that in relation to the Auditor General of Grenada. Can't remember her name now. The case is there in the West Indian reports. Lord Mance in particular was concerned that penalty for misconduct in office by a judge is just removal and nothing more. And that it doesn't sit comfortably with me, and I don't suppose it sits comfortably with most people. Fortunately, you are developing a code outside of the Constitution, unlike the Turks. Their code, the sanction for breach of this code of conduct that they held up, the sanction is removal from ministerial office. So you need a code of conduct. But more particularly, with respect, Honorable Attorney General, I'd like to suggest that you need legislation to regulate campaign financing of political parties. And you need a Freedom of Information Act. I think those two, plus the Code of Conduct and this legislation, as a suite of legislation, will ensure that Barbados has taken proper steps towards providing minimum standards for good governance and the conduct of persons in public life. We have had experience in Turks with political campaign financing legislation. I think we're the only one in the region. It was rushed in 2012 by the British government. They had taken back responsibility for the Constitution from the local people because of the egregious behavior of Messick and his people. And they wanted to hand back responsibility via an election. So election was to be held in November 2012. And we received the document, legislation from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in August to have it implemented to work for the election in November. It was foisted, but they're dependent territory, so they had to carry out the directive. We got it done by bring in persons who had worked that kind of legislation in England to assist us, and engaging the political parties, and in fact, all the candidates as to the requirements for returns, as to how much you spend every week, and so on. Now, that legislation has settled down, and for the 2016 election, we didn't have any problems. But what is noticeable has been the vast difference in the quantum of money used for advertising and for campaigning. Lord Justice All's report speaks of millions of dollars, and their dollar is the US dollar, by the way. Speaks of millions of dollars being used in campaigns, and of ministers receiving millions of dollars and classifying them as loans. But however that may be, let me just give you some figures, because I think the people in the Turks and Caicos Islands should be proud of themselves and what they have done. For the 2012 elections, the three parties that contested those elections, after the legislation was brought controlling expenditure, spent $578,303. Advertising and publicity materials accounted for $236,952, or approximately 41% of the total expenditure. And in terms of the parties, the PDM spent $135,000. I give you wrong figures. The PNP, $332,000. The PPP, $110,000. I know these sound like small numbers to some of you, but even if you spend $1 million in Barbados, you must be, each party spends $1 million, there must be control. There must be control. In 2016, they spent a bit more, they spent a lot more. Whereas PDM spent $135,000 in 2012, in 2016, they spent $297,000. Sorry, my mistake. $367,000. They got donations of $297,000. And the PNP, they spent $416,800, and they got donations of $268,000. One of the things, it's a phenomenal thing that has happened. People actually call the Integrity Commission in Turks and Caicos and ask to come and see you and say, well, we want you to know, and we have brought along the check, that we are going to give the PDM 25,000 or whoever 10,000. They actually come and show you and get your blessing for it. And there are limits. Of course, you can't go above 30,000. But whatever happens, whatever are the limits that are imposed, as I said, those are matters of policy, not for me. It's for the people involved in politics and in the government and the opposition to determine what is level. But we have to try and control campaign financing. Otherwise, surely we understand that the more people or groups or companies, maybe even conglomerates, contribute to a political party, the more they're going to expect to receive after the election. And that contribution and expectation will constitute the source for corruption. Sir, I hope I haven't overstayed my welcome, but I've been going for an hour and 10 minutes, I believe, and I am now available to answer whatever questions honorable members and members of the Senate have for me.
Let me thank you for that wide-ranging and thorough presentation on your experiences in Turks and Caicos. I'm confident that your experiences will help to contribute and have already helped to contribute towards making this bill significantly better than it is in its current form. I shall now open the floor to the members of the committee so that we can engage with you on a one-on-one on the bill and on your experiences.
Thanks, Chairman. So, David, I listened very carefully and I agreed with a lot of what you said. I only know the only things I didn't agree with. So it's not going to be many.
And you're speaking as opposition.
Pardon?
You're a member of the opposition, right?
Not right now. You mentioned that the police force should not provide the investigators under this thing. I have a difficulty with that, and I would like you to explain why. Because right now we are an independent country, and if we have the resources in Barbados to use, the police force the commissioner of police can designate persons to be the investigators for the commission. In the same way that in the old days, before you had an immigration department, the commissioner of police used to designate certain officers to be immigration officers. Every policeman was not an immigration officer. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking along those lines when I read the act that we can have something similar.
Provided that they are seen, provided they become, not even are seen, they become employees of the commission. We've had police officers move from the force to, I'm thinking of Mr. Gyson Mears. Financial, when we set up that, I was the Attorney General at the time. Financial Investigations Unit, I think we called it. And Mr. Gyson Mears came over from the police and headed the FIU. He was not subject to the direction of the commissioner. If he had information, of course, he would route it through the commissioner, DPP, with a view to prosecution. But I would prefer if don't mind where you get the investigators from. If you get them from the police force, of course, you're denuding the police force of those persons. If you take, for this, in Barbados, you can need start with about 5 investigators. Because I understand there's material already there in the Public Accounts Committee report. Suppose that went suppose that was to be investigated. You need about 5 investigators. Yes, Mr. Franklin.
The next thing I am concerned about is the Section 39.
39.
Or Clause 39, as it is the bill right now. The Register of Interest. And sub paragraph 2, we have that this register can be made available to members of the public. I wonder why,
So the public can see that you are a director of XYZ company and that you have shares in Massey? But
For what purpose? You know? But we don't have freedom of information legislation. If you wanted to have that, then so be it.
you have what?
Freedom of information.
But I said that this has to.
No, but I had a comment on the side was saying freedom of information. I'm saying we don't have it. So if we're gonna do that, let me do all together. Let me get everything. Instead of these piecemeal measures that and anyway, I want to move on. Section 59.
Wait, you really think that the fact that you
No, but, sorry.
were a director of a company should not be known? It is on the corporate affairs database. The directors of companies are there. So if you have to state in a register that I'm a director, I was a director, or whatever, what is so?
No, but you had said earlier that this information is not public.
I said it was not public? No, it is public. Not the declaration, these are different things. The declaration of assets is a different thing from a register of interest. A register of interest is what it says it is. A register where you indicate, I'm a director of this, I have a contract with the government to repair transmissions. I am a shareholder in whatever company. Don't have any trust, don't have any beneficial interest in land. I don't have any fund to which I can contribute. Yes, but I am a member of the Unity Trade Union, particulars of any political, trade, or professional association.
We need more. We need more members of Unity. No, I said we need more members of Unity.
Particulars relating to sources of income, and all you state there is that my income arises from the fact that I'm a member of Parliament and I'm paid through Parliament. That's it. You don't say how much you get paid. It says you don't disclose the amount. If your income is as a pensioner, you say my income is as a result of pensions or what. That's it. It's the source, not the amount.
Okay,
So this is separate. And this is, you go into the office of the Integrity Commission in Turks, and you ask to see the register, and take it out and show you what the MPs are involved. This is to make sure that you are not involved in something private, in secret private business, which could possibly conflict with your duties as an MP or member of the Senate.
All right, thanks. The next thing you mentioned that captured me was the section 59 or clause 59, where if you make a false report, provide false information.
Yeah.
There's nothing in here that says that if you reasonably believe that information was good, then because sometimes people might believe something and go and report it, wouldn't this deter people now because you might not know if it is true or not, or absolutely true from, or let's say the person is found not guilty, even though the information might be accurate. And if that happens, you will say, well, look, no, he's made a false declaration against, a false report against me. I've been found not guilty. What happens to that person under this legislation?
The person who makes a false statement?
Well, it might not even be false. It's just that you couldn't then prove it in court.
Do you see a key word there? I know you pay a lot of attention to your legal language. The key word in this, maliciously. Maliciously, that word imports the mens rea in the offense.
Yeah, but that's the thing.
It doesn't necessarily mean with malice. Maliciously, it could be that you did it, yes, out of spite or envy, the usual connotation that one would attribute to malice. On the other hand, it may mean unlawfully or without good reason. The courts will have to construe that word maliciously.
That's what we're trying to get at, because
That's the key word.
I want it definite, as opposed to the interpretation, because one judge interprets one way, another judge interprets, you know? So I don't know. See, I'm not a legal person. I'm trying to find out what will happen here, because I might have made a complaint that some person made a
No, I think that there is plenty case law
send some money to their
in the
dentist.
criminal law as to how courts have construed the word maliciously. And basically, it imports a mental element, depending on the particular circumstances of the conduct.
Okay, the next one.
Before you continue, Senator, I just wish to clarify something as well. And the public should not be afraid to come forward with information. The fact that somebody is not found guilty as a result of the information that you have provided does not mean you necessarily open yourself up to be charged.
That's
Because
what I'm
you
trying
can
to find out.
provide honest, good faith information and the person still not be found guilty. So once again, it goes back to the word maliciously. You only have to worry if you go in there with bad. Bajans know what malicious is. If you go in there with bad faith and provide false information, if you provide honest information, honestly held information in good faith, you have nothing to worry about.
Sir, the next thing that got my attention was the appointment of the chairman. And you recommended that it should be done by the Prime Minister in consultation with the Leader of the Opposition.
No, that's not what he said.
The Governor General, on the advice of the, I was just trying to be short, but it is the Prime Minister and would discuss with the Leader of the Opposition or consult with the Leader of the Opposition and then make the recommendation to the Governor General. We know that does not work.
No, I don't agree with that at all.
We've had instances where the Prime Minister told some person, oh, we want so-and-so to be a judge. The Leader of the Opposition said, indeed not. He said, well, I want the man. And we know what
Yeah,
happened.
well, that happened in two cases.
I know of them. That's why I'm
One was
concerned.
mine, which on the paper writing, the Leader of the Opposition took a different position on paper from what he said orally and purported not to agree with my appointment. And there was another one where during Mr. Barrow's time, the recommendation of a particular person was made. The then Leader of the Opposition, as he then was Henry Ford, when he was consulted, he replied in writing. We do not have the habit in Barbados of consulting orally. Our consultations between Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition is in writing. Our consultation has always been in writing. But in the case of that judge, Mr. Ford pointed out that he was being promoted ahead of persons who were senior to him. And Mr. Barrow nevertheless went ahead with his choice and recommended that person for appointment. The sequelae were not pleasant. Not pleasant.
The the best practice so far is the appointment of the ombudsman. It comes to Parliament. The person is recommended, and I believe that that should be the way we go with this rather than these, I can't call it backroom because the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition is not going to backroom, but I mean, I mean, we want more transparency, and I believe that it should be done similar to the appointment of the ombudsman. It comes to Parliament, Parliament agrees or disagrees. I have some more, but I'm talking too much now. I'm going to let somebody else.
Thank you, Senator.
I have no objection in principle to that proposal, but that will be a matter for the committee.
Senator Adler, sorry.
Thank
Leader
you,
of the Opposition.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Sir David, thank you very much for your presentation here this afternoon. I think the work of the committee is off to a good start, with yours being the first presentation. I associate that with the fact that you are a man of proven integrity, tremendous scholarship, etc. I had 5 questions. I'll just go 2, and perhaps I'll get a chance later or whatever. Whistleblower legislation is suggested as being very critical to the effectiveness of integrity in public life legislation. Are you satisfied, having looked at this bill, that this is adequate? That's the first question. The second question is the section at 2526 on blind trust. The blind trust, the way it's operated here, the stipulations at 25.7 and at 26, where there's no obligation for disclosure in 2 cases. At 25.7, where a specified person in public life dies, there shall be no obligation on the administrators of his estate to file the declaration which the specified person in public life would have been required to file had he lived.
Because they would not,
They
would not necessarily know what he knew died within.
I'm just asking if you're satisfied that there's no weakness in this, in the way it is worded. And at 26, where a specified person in public life holds any money or any property in trust for another person, not being his spouse or child or other person in public life, he shall so state in his declaration, but shall not be required to disclose the terms of the trust. So I'm just asking about the adequacy of the provisions here on blind trust and whistleblowing, and if you're satisfied that they're strong enough.
All right, first of all, on whistleblower, the provisions here towards the end, 60, let me get the numbers.
68 or 70 something.
68 to about 72, I think.
So David, is your microphone on?
It is on. Probably I was making myself a little too comfortable.
Yes, Sir David,
Yes,
those are the sections.
68 to 77. The difficulty with whistleblower legislation, if you look internationally, the best sources I have come across when I had to look at them were the U.S., which has specific whistleblower legislation, so-called, at the federal and at the state level. And then in England, they have a phrase. They don't call it whistleblower like America. They call it protected disclosures or legislation protection from disclosure. You
It's
find
actually
that,
called the Public Interest Disclosure Act.
sorry,
The Public Interest Disclosure Act
who is that?
in England.
But there's also the protected disclosures act.
In other jurisdictions, in
No,
New
in England
Zealand.
too. In England too. It deals with the employees of the National Health Service and so on. It's very limited. Some of those we have captured in the Turks legislation and here in Barbados. I think that these are adequate. Over time, you will see if there are any weaknesses and you need further amendment. But I think the essentials are here. And one of the best provisions is, of course, Section 76. If you're an employee and you give information about a public official and there's what the section calls a detriment, then you're guilty of an offense and liable for imprisonment or a penalty. An employer or any person in authority over a public official who subjects the official to a detriment by reason of this is what it means, by reason of the fact that he blew the whistle, it's liable. And similarly, in respect of contracts, it is entirely possible that an employer will sign, an employee will sign a contract of employment with the employer, and we know that it is usual for most employer-employee contracts at a certain level to contain a confidentiality clause. And in fact, it will go further and contain a clause that restricts you from trading or working in the same line for a specified time and within a specified geographical area. So you can find as an employee that you sign a contract which says that when you leave this employment, you cannot engage in similar employment for 5 years and within a radius of 10 miles from where you were working before. What we call a restrictive, what do you call it, Nigel? Contracting restraint of trade. Now, this section 77 says that if you put in an employee's contract that he cannot make a disclosure about something that is corrupt, that clause is void in that contract. It applies to an agreement between a person and his employer, whether or not part of the contract of employment, including an agreement to refrain from instituting proceedings for breach of contract. But, Joe, sorry,
If you don't mind.
Leader of the opposition.
Yeah, just one aspect for clarification. From my research, my reading, a lot of emphasis was put on not only protection, but compensation for persons who blew the whistle. Compensation.
Yeah, it must get
To the extent that persons benefited from having blown the whistle on people, and they benefited out of the proceeds of the crime associated with that which they had exposed. Am I wrong? No, I was saying one of the areas of concern with reference to whistleblowing was the matter of the use of remuneration, compensation for those who blew the whistle in cases where proceeds of crime were used to compensate them for coming forward.
Solutions Barbados, in their written submission, actually proposes that.
Well, I ain't referring to solutions, Mr. Chair.
No, but
You have a carrot and stick approach. It could be an incentive to encourage people to come forward.
Well, in some jurisdictions, police forces have a fund that is kept secret and is administered by the senior police officers as inducements to get information. I put it no higher than that.
In terms of our order of proceedings, Senator Cummings, followed by the Honorable Ralph Thorne, followed by the Honorable Charles Griffith.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for an exceptional presentation today, Sir David. I think you have, over the last couple of years, you've spent quite a bit of time talking publicly on this subject, and of course, we've been following your work in the Turks and Caicos, and we're quite pleased to have you here making this presentation here today. I wanted to go back to your earlier reference to Section 4 on the functions of the Commission, where you included an element on public education. And I wanted to ask a question specific to the experience of the Turks and Caicos. When you look at the reports that have been done by the OECD, particularly on the European Union and on Transparency International, for example, those kinds of entities, they talk very extensively about the importance of public education.
Critical.
And the balance between pro-integrity and anti-corruption measures. How would you recommend that these issues be treated to in the context of the section that you just included this under? Thank you.
As I indicated during the my opening, we thought that it was essential to start in schools with the young people, with the children. And the public education officers go into the schools and put on whatever projects. They feel a variety of different things. And we have competitions among the schools, essays, they do little plays on corruption, all kinds of things. That is left to the ingenuity of the Public Relations Department. My concern was not to tell you what to do, but to insist that we must have public buy-in of this at all levels. You're going to have special seminars for the specified persons in public life. When the documents come out, I'm talking about the Code of Conduct and the legislation in particular. Then you have to ensure that lower down, that will come later on, but lower down in the hierarchy of public officials, people are also aware who are not necessarily going to file at the first or second intake. But when people retire, they will move up, and ultimately they will become persons in public life. And as I say, you have to do it in the schools and among the youth groups and so on. There are several target areas. I'm sure that a staff of 3 or 4 will be fully employed getting the message out.
So as a follow-up to that question and in your answer, your very detailed answer, the UN Convention Against Corruption and then the National Integrity System assessment mechanisms implemented by Transparency International covers quite a number of those things, but there are a few groups that you mentioned there, for example, that are not currently incorporated in this legislation. So when there's an assessment of the level of corruption or perceived corruption in a given jurisdiction, there are some things that are not covered. So you mentioned the role of the media. They've also included under sections related to external scrutiny, civil society actors, and of course the reference to public sector, to political parties, but also the business community. How are those things treated to in the respective legislation, in either singular legislation or multiple pieces of legislation?
They're not legislated at all. They're not legislated. What you do is to create your public education department that then targets the private sector. You see, unless you, well, perhaps I was a little too loose there in my language, because there is a provision in here about bribery. But we do not have a separate bribery ordinance. There's just a section. I don't think there's more than one section on bribery. But to the extent that bribery takes place as a rule, as a general rule, between somebody in the private sector and somebody in the public sector, you should be having a seminar for the Employers Confederation or the, what's it called, BCCI, the Chamber of Commerce, those sorts of people, on this legislation. I would expect that after this is passed, that those kinds of organizations will be targeted for special seminars. But you haven't legislated for it. You can't limit yourself by putting 2 or 3 in here, and then you find that there are several other non-governmental organizations that perhaps you need to target. So the program is one where the modalities of dissemination of the information relative to the legislation should be developed by the commission, the staff of the commission, and then disseminated.
Thank you, Chair. So David,
Yeah.
I think you know that this is for me a personal pleasure. I wanted to draw attention to Section 35(5),
35.
which proscribes inquiry into the life of the public figure after 2 years, or when he's been out of office 2
You
years.
said 35.5, I don't have it.
32.5, I beg your pardon.
Oh,
32.5,
32.5.
I'm so sorry. That after the person has ceased to be in public life, no inquiry may be made 2 years post the event of his departure from office. I wanted to go beyond that and to ask your position on the declaration itself. Is there a case for the declaration of assets, most critically, being made extinct, being extinguished from the record after that person leaves public office? Say a chap has left 7, 10 years later, and there is some document somewhere of his assets at the time. Is that fair to him or to her? Or when he leaves public office, he or she, when they leave public office, should that record become extinct?
Any limitation passes, you mean?
Should it become extinct? I know I'm bold in this bunk, sir, during the course of the match without any forewarning, but
That's all right.
let us, if we can, give it some thought. Should we be giving thought to this? Is it? Do we remain consistent with the 2 years mentioned in the legislation? Do we say 5 years? Do we say 7 years? Do we say 10 years? I'm thinking about it. Is it fair to a person to have that record on him or her some 10 years after that person has left the public office, some 10 years after that person has become a private citizen, and there's still some lingering record?
But it's not, well, when you use the word record, you are making it sound as though there was something criminal. Let me give you an example.
Well,
I retired from, as you probably know, this commission and the Judicial Legal Service Commission in February in the Turks. And they couldn't find anybody to succeed me. They asked me to continue. And I held on and said I was going at the end of May, during which time we found a judge from Cayman who would take over from me. But he's got ill, can't take up the position yet. So they've asked me to continue. So I'm still holding on now, officially to the end of August, but I suspect that they're going to ask me to continue even into September and possibly October. Since I retired, I said February, I retired 31st of May. I prepared and filled up my declaration because my exit declaration was in May, and I gave it to the governor. There is nothing in that that they could come up 2 years, 5 years later on, that I would be ashamed of. So I'm not sure what your concern is with 32.5. 32.5, as I understand it, just says, look, you have ceased to be an MP on the 24th of May, 25th of May, 2018. After 2 years, 24th of May, 2020, nobody can ask you anything about. The thing is statute barred. The statute barred after that. We want now the actual declaration that the person filed.
Yes.
Well-
Is there a case for that declaration being extinguished? A person, the reasoning is that a person has become a private citizen again. And a private citizen is entitled to have his business private. So that, as I said, if he's left office 5 years,
But the business was relevant
at the time,
at the time. It was public when he held public office.
it was
He
indeed.
had a duty to file.
Yes.
Right.
But he's become a private citizen again. His assets, there may have been accretion to his assets or diminution. No one knows. But that record pertains to him
That was the state of his
at the time.
assets, liabilities, assets,
At the time.
income and liabilities.
At the
and
time
those
he
of
held
his
public
spouse
office.
And his children under 18 at the time.
At the time.
Right.
When he becomes a private citizen again, is there a need for the public to have access to his,
The public doesn't have access.
sorry, not the public, an official,
Let me help you.
to have access to his records after he has become a private citizen again?
Let me help you.
Well, I don't think there's much in it, but if somebody wanted to draft a clause 7 or a 5.1 or what is it? These are subsections. But an additional clause to say that when a person has ceased to be in public life, his declaration should be returned to him or something like that. I don't know. Y'all can look at that. I haven't given it a lot of thought. I haven't considered it before. But let me say this. One of the things that we should be aiming at in Barbados when we set up this is to provide for filing online. Because the time will come, there's obvious danger, of course, and I don't know how many people will be affected by this. A good few hundred, 700 or 800 people probably. And you have, in the commission, having physical possession and control of the forms are quite thick. You can imagine the storage problems after a few years. That's why I recommend that it be done online. But if you want to say that the person should be entitled to have his last declaration returned to him, if he chooses, can do that.
So David, just by way of explaining, because I'm conscious as well of the fact that the public is listening in, I think further to expand Mr. Thorne's point is there really is no reason for the commission to hold those declarations after they have no evidential value. If the limitation period is 2 years after you leave public office and that time has passed, then the commission can't rely on it anyway, so they might as well destroy it.
Yeah, you can give it back. That's a good point. Yeah.
And just before we move off of that, Sir David, under the same section, we've had a number of comments, I've been seeing some comments online, and people have approached me with respect to the short time frame for the limitation. So what this section says here, section 32.5, is an inquiry should not be commenced after 2 years from the date on which the person ceased to be in public life. What is your feeling with respect to moving that?
That is the commission commencing an inquiry.
The commission commenced an inquiry.
Right, yeah.
what's your feeling on the length of time there? I personally think it's a little bit short. And it should perhaps be 5, which is a normal parliamentary term.
Fine, I would have no objection to that. These things are so much a matter of value judgments very often. Five is fine. But I think the leader of the opposition never had an answer to his question about blind trusts. This is something that is recognized all over the world. It is a mechanism that it perhaps is not the best, because philosophically, you're asking for transparency and full disclosure. But at the same time, you're saying you can, you can hide, if you like, some of your assets. The law has not been able to find any compromise to deal with that conundrum other than the blind trust. And subsection 5 explains what a blind trust is. It is created when a person in public life enters into an agreement with a trust company, not any old person, a qualified trust company, whereby any or all of your assets, and those of your spouse and children, are conveyed to the trust company for the trust company to manage, administer, and control it in its absolute discretion, without having to come back to you and say, well, what am I to do with this? What am I to do with that piece of land that you've got at Concept Bay and the boat and so on? You drop out as the person in public life and hand over your assets for management by this independent trust company. It's just to, how can I put it? It's just to remove from the person in public life the temptation of having to do public duty and at the same time using your own private wealth or assets in a way that may conflict between, as I explained earlier, your duty and your private interests. So to ensure that you don't get into those problems, just hive off your assets in a blind trust. At the end of your time, you call back the trust.
The Honorable Charles Griffith.
So David, my concern is section 45, 1 through 5, where you ask to declare gifts that are in excess of $1,000, and then the commission shall determine if it's a personal or official gift. And then I'm querying if 4 and 5 are not contradicting one another.
And the first thing is that the gift must have a specific value. If it's more than 1,000, it has to be declared. Now, we see from time to time, I think it happened to me once when I was in public life. You get a gift. I was once given a plaque and a policeman's hat by a group of police from the States who came down here for a conference one summer. I had to open it or address it and so on. And they gave me this thing, no question. Is that mine? Or is that really the government of Barbados'? Is it a personal gift? When a minister, we are accustomed to see this now, a ship comes in for the first time, a new line comes in at the port, and the captain gives the minister some gift. The minister gives him something from Barbados, from Medford's mahogany. Is the gift which the minister got personal, or is that for the ministry, that he takes it back and puts it in the ministry, says it's a painting or something?
The intention of the donor.
But you will never know that, because the captain comes in on the boat, gives you the thing, you have a couple of drinks, he sails out at 6 o'clock, you don't see him again in life. But there are persons in the private sector who would offer gifts to people in public life. Some may be legitimate, like those I mentioned, or the gift might be in anticipation of a favor. I think we've only had one of these in Turks, where we were asked to determine whether it was personal or public official gift, and we said it was private, and the person could keep it.
The last question for,
yes, sir.
last two questions for Sir David, and then we have our ladies first.
Mr. Chairman, Sir David, wouldn't it be easier to define personal gift and official gift to reduce the likelihood of having to come for assistance from the commission? So that you at least have guidelines?
Guidelines as to what is what.
Yeah.
Excellent point. Excellent point. I like that.
So David, I just want to, and I'm not speaking for myself, mind you, when I ask you this. You know, you're asked to report on the assets of yourself and your spouse.
And any children.
And your children. Now, that's what I'm saying. I'm not speaking for myself. But suppose the spouse and you aren't getting along too good. And she said, I ain't getting that to you.
Well, we have that all the time.
You know, what will happen in a situation like that? You leave public office, you divorce, or what?
We've had a number of those cases, I must tell you, in the Turks, where the parties have alleged that during the period for which they should be reporting, they broke up. One left or went to the States or to England or whatever. It does pose a problem.
Get horned, you know, something. And the last thing I want to ask you, sir, is senators, not parliamentary secretaries or ministers. I'm talking about other senators. They have to, or we have to declare our assets as well. But what influence can a senator have over anything? Yes, I'm asking because we can't influence contracts. We can't do anything. Independent senators more so than anybody else. Are you going to bribe an independent senator to do what? To get a government contract?
No.
Why are they being asked to declare
to
their
come in
assets
here,
as well?
to come in here and take a position and criticize, or as we would say in the vernacular, sandpaper or lambaste somebody or company or something, and somebody pays you $10,000 to come and spend half an hour.
David, but ultimately, following on from Senator Franklin's point, notwithstanding your example, when it comes to the vote, unless it's a situation where you need a 2/3 majority, it's not going to affect the outcome in terms of getting whatever is before the Senate passed.
Well, can you be dogmatic that what you say, even if you are not a member of the government senatorial team, can you be dogmatic that what you say will not have influence? I don't think so. We have seen, you made some points recently, but we have seen independent senators who make points, who have made points, strong points, and got legislation sent back down below. So, but you all mustn't sell yourself short. You mustn't sell yourself short.
Thank you, Mr. David. One last query. I noticed, sir, on page 15, the definition, 15 of the bill, the definition of spouse. Spouse on page 15, subsection B, makes reference to a person who is living with the specified person in public life in the circumstances of husband and wife for a continuous period of 1 year during the period covered by the person's declaration. 1 year, Sir David, do you think, common law definition is
But I was going to
5
say that
years.
perhaps you should go back to the common law definition.
I feel so, 1 year is a little
Not the common law
short.
definition.
The family law, sorry, family law.
law definition
Family
for
law
a
is-
union other than marriage.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sir David.
Yeah, and the year is too short, doesn't prove anything.
So David, on behalf of the committee, and in fact on behalf of the entire listening and viewing public of Barbados, let me thank you for a sterling presentation to this committee. I had not anticipated that you would have regaled us for so long in the afternoon, but certainly everything that you've said has been met with rapt attention by all of the members of the committee. I don't know if the occasion will arise for us to have you back before us, but I do hope that you will consider yourself a resource person who will be available to us should we need to call on you again before the life of this committee is ended. Thank you very much, and I'd like, in the usual parliamentary way, to applaud you for
Well, thank you all very much for having me, and sorry that I overstayed my welcome. But I thought it was an interesting exercise, and this is new and important legislation that the public has a right to know about. And to the extent that I can be of assistance and help inform public opinion, I'll make myself available.
Thank you for that
Thank you
kind
very much.
assurance. The committee's last invitee for, thank you, Sir David. Sir David, you can feel free to stay with us. We have one other presentation by Dr. Fillmore Aline. Dr. Aline is, I think, an accountant by profession, and the head of the Management Studies Department at the University of the West Indies. What is not perhaps so well known is that he has published many articles, required reading on the matter of integrity, legislation, and governance. And I therefore would like to invite Dr. Aline to join us and to make his presentation. Sir David? Sir David, if you're going to stay, I'd like to extend to you the benefit of staying at the Senate table. Yes, please.
Your welcome has been extended.
The furniture may have changed a little since then. Same chair? Dr. Aline, the floor is yours, sir. You're welcome.
Good afternoon, one and all. The esteemed company, it's a pleasure to I've been invited to make a presentation on this important piece of legislation. And really, I feel like playing, in terms of when you're playing for the West Indies, and having come after Gordon Greenwich is a big bill to fill. Huh? I know it was long, but it was very interesting, and it serves as a sort of launch pad in terms of what I will be speaking on. I first have to say, for the benefit of those who may not know what I am, the chair mentioned some of my stuff that I have done, but I come based on several things. I was still an accountant in practice, teaching at the university in governance and ethics, and as Senator Tate has chided me recently, I've not blown my trumpet loud enough in terms of my own academic work in this area. I've done a lot of stuff in dealing with corruption and some of what was on the table earlier, dealing with whistleblowing, because that has been my PhD done in the UK. Now, I've also too worked on a number of public sector projects as an audit specialist, having been trained by both the IADB and the World Bank. And certainly, as a part of the context, you'll recognize that these these lending institutions have been certainly pushing the agenda that corruption tends to retard growth in developing countries. My presentation will deal with a few issues. First, contextual information. When you look at where Barbados is at the moment, it's gone through a number of crises over the years. We have had recently Standard and Poor Moody technically downgrading us. We are literally in a bind, and certainly corruption, there's a need for this integrity legislation. Now, I also too wish to acknowledge the government's actually bold attempt to try to get this legislation in place, and I'm so moved to and proud to have Sir David at my left, because I remember, I think sometime last year, there was an exchange when he and Ken Gordon made a presentation, and that one, I thought that he batted well in terms of trying to defend this aspect. It is something that needs to be done. And I just like to start first, so wearing my university hat, trying to educate the ones around, because sometimes there's a lot of things that are not clear and people just use things loosely. And I look at corruption in its simplest form, as defined as the abuse of power for private benefit. And the Oxford Dictionary adopts a more moral and ethical standpoint by defining it as dishonest or illegal behavior from those in authority. Transparency International has rated us, have a decent score, somewhere around 61. But the fact that Sir David has raised earlier what corruption can do, it can really destroy a society. I mean, we don't have any real empirical research on the quantum of the loss that corruption does. But it also destroys trust in institutions and in leaders. And too often, we have had some corporate collapses. Clico, for one, has a big one that has happened. And I'm not sure if people read the newspaper over the weekend. It was really heartbreaking when you see a situation where there were some cases illustrated about persons who has lost faith, and in terms of one member had died as a result with the matter not closing, then you start to realize that corruption itself can have a debilitating effect on society. Now, I wish to those share for all and sundry some of my own research recently, actually in 2017. And this was financed by First Caribbean as MOU with the university. And these are key findings that I want everyone to be aware of. That respondents believe that there's political interference in business, some 89%. And they also believe that there's political interference in the judiciary. That is extremely high. There's also a belief that there's pervasive corruption and fraud in business and government. There's also a belief that government is perceived as not being accountable and transparent. And fourthly, and more importantly, is that government is perceived as not being serious about tackling corruption. So you understand we are dealing with some negative perceptions here. And I'm also reminded of what is really playing out in the international arena of a former politician. It clearly demonstrates the need to have the Integrity in Public Life Bill. Because nobody's a winner. Barbados is suffering as a consequence of this going through, as much as we talk about it. Now, I'd like to look at various aspects of the Integrity Bill, and I would like to let all the sundry know I'm no lawyer, nor claim to be one, but I will deal with some of the things that certainly I would need to have looked at. I think it's a bold attempt. The legislation, as David said, is quite similar to what is going on all around. The fact is its operationalization. That's the issue that you need to do. Now, I am heartened that the esteemed committee has sought wide stakeholder discussion on this bill. And this is based on stakeholder theory because you get a full ventilation of all the issues. But I would encourage you further to follow up, as Sir David said, with organizations that have an interest in this. And more importantly, we too often, and no criticism to you, esteemed committee, that we sit in cloistered halls and make decisions without the inclusion of all the persons who will likely be affected with it. I would expect to the end that the committee will go into the communities and certainly hold some, what we would call town hall meetings and have the feedback from the masses, because there's a general distrust in the public sector, about the public sector. Staffing the Integrity Commission. When I went through the bill, I believe a major concern will arise over how the Integrity Commission is staffed. Too often, observers are more apt to jump to conclusions that the commission is filled with political appointees. I believe the commission should be staffed with independent members who are free from political ties. And this should insulate the commission against political interference. I believe the U.S. have a good model. They have a good model where when you put people forward, then they are interrogated in a way so to make them acceptable, thank you, acceptable to...
Excuse me, 1 second, just as a clarification, you mean the staff of the commission, or the commission itself?
The commission itself. Okay. Sorry about that, okay? So that we have that stakeholder consultation, you go through, so because I'm carrying it a little further from the discussion in the earlier submission, that there's a perception that if the Prime Minister or the Governor General or whoever, there's going to be this belief that there's something trying to sneak through. You understand? There's that belief that, and as soon as you have perceptions that then shape other persons in reality, yeah? I would not want it to be pushed, that the appointments be pushed on the people. We need acceptance from stakeholders. And I'm guided also on what Sir David raised with his successes that he had in the Turks and Caicos. One of the things, if you really observe it, was that he was an outsider. You understand? And certainly that may have accounted for some of the successes gained there. I'm not saying that you want to bring in outsiders, but the position is that the commission itself must be free and fair from any political interference. Also, a change needs to be made in the culture in the public sector. So David raised the issues about the code of ethics. There needs to be some specific code that sets a zero tolerance to unethical behavior. There has to be what we call in accounting tuning from the top, from the leadership. The leadership itself must set examples, and certainly, as Sir David raised, you would expect that there be penalties for any transgressions from the leadership right down to the bottom. And I believe that we need to send that message right through. Also, the removal of conflicts of interest. A major concern of many observers of the behavior of public officials is the awarding of contracts and boards of state-owned enterprises lacking independence. For example, there's a belief, and this is coming from my research, that there's a belief that contracts are awarded to friends and supporters. Now, how do you deal with that? The issue also becomes more critical when individuals in influential positions take up lucrative contracts soon after they leave office. Now, in the accounting profession, auditing profession, we say that there should be what we call a cooling off period before you take up that position. Because obviously the individual who was there at the time in an influential position may be able now to influence it in such a way that then he or she benefits with it. And I would imagine that this cooling off period be implemented, as well as looking at board practices within SOEs, because this is where most of the charges of corruption or wrongdoing seem to prevail. Okay. Now, the declaration of assets and liabilities. This is a very controversial point, and I listened to the various requests, questions raised. If it's a case of you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. When you see people in public life who had, and I just use this thing, had little, and then later on you see them with so much, the question is raised, where did they get this from? I recognize that it can probe into the lives of individuals and can act as a disincentive to do so the public's interest. I also agree, and Sir David raised, he mentioned that there's confidentiality, but I am a practical person, because confidentiality in Barbados is simply a foreign thing. Example, I'm sure in the hospital, sometimes a lot of people go and they support the nurses and doctors, no disrespect to the current, I've gone and got medical there, but as soon as the information just come out. And I'm certain we need to ensure that those persons who serve in public office, that they are well protected as far as those declarations are concerned. It's not enough to just say, well, it should be sealed in some way to try to protect those disclosures, but confidentiality needs to be the key to this. Now, the investigations of reports. I read the various section, but it must also be treated carefully. Based on the principle that an individual is innocent until proven guilty. The matter needs to be treated carefully and quickly to protect all concerned. An issue that seems to bother society is the fact that justice takes too long. And you know, you have these matters hanging over the heads of individuals, and then there's so much rumor and innuendos going on that at the end of it, regardless of whether the person is innocent, the issue still in the public domain, they have been tried and executed, if you live part of that. All right, reporting on the work of the commission. I'm one who believes that there needs to be a lot of transparency and accountability as far as how the public sector is run. What I find is that too often you do not have enough information put in the public domain. And in addition, the communication mechanisms within the public sector leaves a lot to be desired. How will the work of the commission be disclosed? What I had, my personal beef coming out of most of my research is that sometimes you have board minutes and different disclosures, but you don't see anything. Take, for example, the state-owned enterprises. Many of them have not had their financial statements brought up to date. So how is this going to impact it? Are we going to be disclosing all these things that happen until that? So there's something needs to be done about disclosing decisions and the challenges that they encounter. And I believe that the commission can start to move towards that. The other thing is the institutional support and resources. I'm a firm believer that contented cows give better milk. In a case like this, you have to provide adequate resources and pay these, I believe in paying persons to get the work done, right? And you need to have, I mean, you may not have the funds now, but but certainly a case must be made that these individuals is well-staffed, you have proper support mechanisms to get the work done, well-qualified individuals, and it cannot be a part-time activity coming from the commission. As Sir David mentioned, they were a small country in Turks and Caicos, and it was still a lot of stuff. So think about Barbados with much more bigger population. The other thing is whistleblowing protection. Now, I leave this one for discussion here as I crave your indulgence as I start to explain some of the stuff which is a key aspect of my own research. Now, the legislation as it is with respect to whistleblowing makes no distinction really between the channels of whistleblowing. In whistleblowing, there's internal, and then there's external, and as well as there are anonymous channels. The issue that happened is that people fear victimization. We call it personal cost, retaliation. Sometimes, and I'm so guided by an example when I was presenting a paper in Malaysia. And this guy came to me and shared a story where he said that in India, there was an individual who got information, who knew about information on the roads, the building of the roads, that there was some corruption. And he took up the phone and called the minister and said, do not say who it is or whatever, but this is what's going on. And the minister went into a cabinet meeting later and let his name slip. 2 days later, he was found murdered. Personal cost is a very important consideration as far as reporting. People, if you go to most of the social gatherings, or for want of a better word, the watering holes around Barbados, you will hear the rumors rampant about what is really going on. That's not the issue. The issue is, why should I come forward? One person asked, should you incentivize the whistleblowing by having some fund, like what happens in the US, where they have some funds provided to help? But you need to make sure that the whistleblowing legislation has been put in such a way that it encourages and gives the whistleblower the protection to come in. You have to be very careful also too about informing. Informing has a malevolent intent. You with me? A whistleblower is one who's supposed to be trying to change, to root out the corruption. But nowhere in the legislation do I see anything about anonymous tips when you have hotlines. Will there be a hotline? Most people prefer to hide and report rather than coming forward and being able to be identified. These are questions or considerations that you need to be very clear about. I'm not sure what operates in Sir David's experiences, but asking me to write and say who I am or whatever about that, the Honorable Chair is corrupt. It's going to be a stretch to do. If you ask me to email me or maybe send it right through so that you start to investigate, I think that may be the way to do it. Now, I found in some of my research on whistleblowing that the key things are there's a general reluctance to whistleblow because society is small. There's a high personal cost which lowers the likelihood of whistleblowing because most individuals feel there's retaliation, ostracism, reprisals, threats. Some have even said that they've been harassed to drop what they were doing in terms of reporting. And some have been also faced in this country with threats of dismissals in terms of reporting. Some have said to me straight, boy, if I had to do this again, I wouldn't. I was forced to leave. So what do you do in the public sector to try to get this one clear? Also, too, you have to remember, and I like what Sir David shared in terms of the culture and code of conduct. If you have a disgruntled workforce that is observing unethical practices going on, as one person said in a piece of research that I had done about 2 years ago, said, as long as they are not carrying away me, I don't care. You understand? Which is understandable. You with me? Apathy, beautiful thing. So it's really changing the culture. And the other thing is that there's a belief, and I'm just putting these things on the table for the commission to have some consideration in terms of, and as David said, look at this as just a sweep. You have to go out regulations and different things as you try to bring everything together. It cannot be done. And he put it nicely, again, it's almost like an iterative process as you get this thing go through. There's a lack of confidential and trusted reporting mechanisms in most of the organizations, including the public sector. There's a belief, as a couple of people said in this piece of research in 2017, we don't know how far up this thing gone. So these are things that you need to get straightened. Now, just finally, I guess my time is nearly up. I would say to the committee that you have to go and start to change the culture. So the training and education that Sir David raised, that is something that has to be paramount, right? The idea is some people believe, and I did my own little testing over the weekend in preparation for here, is that this is just another talk shop. That's the belief. I'm not saying it is, so I beg you. You need now to push to the next level, okay? And also, too, the aspect of which the leader for the opposition raised about whistleblowing is having the protection and the incentives to report. Too often, reports come in, and as two individuals said in some practice, in a study earlier, people just say, oh, leave it here with me, I'll deal with it, and nothing happens. Then that creates distrust. I say, though, in closing, though, that corruption is viewed as a global problem. We need to work together to prevent corruption before it becomes the norm and reaches epidemic levels, and ensure that life in our community, at work, and in our country is free of corruption. The Integrity Bill, as I say here now, is a start in the right direction. What I would say is try to get it working, have as much consultation as possible. You don't want to rush it. I'm not saying to stall it, but make sure you get certain things in place, and then you can have as many amendments as possible in terms of trying to get it finalized. At the moment, I am doing some other research, which is with a team, in terms of looking at governance on boards of directors in state-owned enterprises. I hope that my submission here don't clam people up now at this point, but certainly we at the university, we are trying to ensure that we make our own contribution to trying to change, to create that change. And certainly I stand with from my own research and so on to be able to assist the committee in its current work or any future work as we go on from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aline. A fitting follow-up to Sir David Simmons's. In fact, I'd like to suggest that yours, though not as lengthy, stands exactly alongside his. And thank you very much for your contribution. And the floor is now open for Senator Tate. Would you like to start?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Aline, you started your submission this afternoon with making the broad statement that the commission should be free from political interference. I believe I would have gotten you clearly. So my question to you is, based on the first schedule, which speaks to the persons that would be appointed to the commission. Now, let me just say that political interference can take many forms, but for my clarity, I'm just seeking to hear you on the fact that a number of the persons who must be appointed to the commission will be appointed by the Governor General after consultation, or if we use Sir David's words, on the advice of the Prime Minister and consultation with the Leader of the Opposition. So as it currently stands, it's after consultation with the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition for a number of the positions. So I'd like to hear you, and then two of the positions actually, one of them, a person appointed by the Governor General on the advice of the Prime Minister, that's section 1E. And then there's 1F that speaks solely to the appointment by the Governor General on the advice of the Leader of the Opposition. The attorney at law with at least 10 years is No, I don't want to use that one. The person who holds or who has held the office of a judge, that appointment is by the Governor General after consultation with the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. So we have, and the member of the clergy, hello, by the, which is an appointment by the Governor General after consultation with the Prime Minister. Yeah, the Leader of the Opposition. Anyway, so I would like to hear you on that in the context of your statement that the commission should be free from political interference. And as I said, there are different forms of political interference. I'm not in any way suggesting that the Prime Minister or the Leader of the Opposition should be considered in the broad heading of political interference. But in terms of the perception of the public at large as to what this commission consists of and the persons who are appointed to the commission, and that perception then leads to a willingness or an unwillingness to buy into it vis-a-vis the declaration and the registering of assets. I'd like to hear you on that and how the committee can help with the public education as suggested by Sir David to determine if we are going to get buy-in, real buy-in, or if it's going to be foisted on persons, as I think Sir David used that word too.
Well,
Thank-
Senator Tate, the issue here, and we try not to be too cumbersome, there are perceptions out there, and we have to be real and practical at this point, is that, you know, if you put somebody, if someone is put there, a person could only be acting in my own interest. What I'm proposing or suggesting is that maybe a better way is that if the Prime Minister or the Governor General on the advice based on what Sir David is suggesting, says that it's going to be Fillmore Alleyne, I believe there should be enough discussion and stakeholder feedback back and forth so to understand and ensure that, look, okay, we are happy at the end with this individual. So I am so moved or guided because of the way how in the U.S. sometimes you have someone who's going to be a Supreme Court judge, and then that person is asked by different interest groups and different things, you know, questions, their position on different stuff. At the end, that vetting leaves you with in any event, the Prime Minister and say can still make the decision. However, that person is held up for public scrutiny. And that's what I believe should be a better approach to trying to get this thing done. Because at least the Prime Minister will be able to say, yes, we went through all of that and you think you've gotten satisfaction that this is the right person or persons to sit on the committee. That, to me, would really ensure then that there's acceptance to the whole thing.
Thank you, Dr. Arlene. Another question for you. You spoke much about the issue of confidentiality and the lack thereof in our society, particularly since we're a small country. You said a lot, something needs to be done. Those were your words. My question is, based on your research in Barbados and throughout the region, and I dare say the world, how have you found that confidentiality has been handled to the extent that it assisted the legislation to be received by the public?
What I found is that, and it's not only here in Barbados, let's just put it this way, it's throughout the region, there's a distrust in terms of sharing. And I'm sure Sir David, with his own experiences, recognized that people will ask questions and started there on, what are you going to do with this information? I'm not sure that this is not going to come back and bite me. Can I be sure? And as Senator Franklin said, sometimes there are disclosures that you make in the interest of time, you really realize later that it might be the wrong disclosure too. You understand? But the idea is that we need to start to move forward. by creating mechanisms where the information is sealed. So David mentioned about the online case, but we have to be very careful and ensure that there's no hacking, because, I mean, right now, people try to hack into different things and ensure that those safeguards are placed. He said that they are sealed, which is a good thing to do. And what Senator Thorne, Honorable Thorne, said at the time is that, there has to be some consideration for removing that information when you are no longer in public life. If you're not in public life anymore, why do I need your declaration? Or as Sir David said, you're making your exit declaration. Let's close it off. After that, I don't need my information anymore out there hanging around. You with me? It's of no value to anyone, except if after 5 years you come back again. You understand? So those are the things. But you need to have safeguards in place for these declaration of assets. And the fear is that, as I said, from the research coming through in Jamaica, is the same thing. You understand? I've been sharing with a colleague. They have now where they use the term through the Contractor General. They call it informing. You understand, right? There's a distinction between informing and whistleblowing. Okay, but what happens is that the belief is that some of this information in Jamaica, it finds its way out into different domains. So I think what we, as a country, now have to do is to ensure that we provide all the necessary safeguards that it's like Fort Knox to get this information. So systems and procedures have to be put in place.
Thank you.
Dr. Allen, I heard your initial comments and then your further comments just now with respect to your concerns about the confidentiality of the declarations, because nothing confidential in Barbados. What would you suggest? I mean, the initial draft attempted to put some penalties in place and address some of those concerns. I'm curious to hear from you. What would you suggest to address your concerns that is not already in the legislation?
Well, as I said, with the legislation, there's not a problem, it's the operationalizing of it. The issue is that you have to make sure that whether it's through a regulation or whatever, and as Sir David said, you can't put every iota in the legislation, but certainly putting certain mechanisms in place that there's some trust, there's some confidence in what it is going through. Hiring confidential staff in there, putting the stiffer penalties if need be in terms of my information, because I am not going to feel good that one day, I'm doing all these declarations and then soon I see it on social media. You understand? I am so taken with some of the stuff that I see on social media that I thought was confidential. You understand? You see copies or pictures of invoices and all sorts of stuff. We said, well, there's nothing private anymore. You understand? So all I'm just saying is that we need to have mechanisms put in place to ensure that those persons who declare feel confident that their information will not be in the public domain.
Okay, I don't want to put you on the spot right now, but I am very, very interested in the further development of this. So what I will ask for you to do is, when you go away, just address your mind to it and try to think of what would satisfy you with respect to those mechanisms, and then contact us back through email or through the clerk, that we can then try to give them consideration or manifest them either in this or supporting legislation. Because I hear what you're saying, and you're not the first person to say it, so it is a common representation out there. But for us to properly address it and to allay the concerns of the public, then perhaps if we get some feedback from the public as to what they want to see, that would give them comfort, then we can properly deal with it. So, as I say, I don't want to put you on the spot now, but I would be really interested if you could address your mind to that and come back to us that we can take it into consideration.
I will do that.
Thank you.
by
Mr.
next.
Chairman, if I could just add to Senate, Minister, Minister Abrams' point, if I would also be interested in seeing, because of your wide-ranging research, what has worked and not worked in the areas that you have researched, the countries that you've researched.
I have no problem doing that.
Because it might be that something works in a bigger country that wouldn't work here and vice versa. So I'm interested to see the scope of it as it relates to the safeguards and mechanisms that you have referred to in responding to both myself and Minister Abrams. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much, Dr. Allen, for taking the time. I'm certainly pleased to see the University of the West Indies sitting at the table. That is a personal pleasure for me.
Thank you. Yeah.
I have a question for you, and it's based on the extensive nature of your research and your experience in other jurisdictions. In particular, you made reference here to Jamaica, and I want to call your attention to your experience in the CARICOM region. Now, as you know, throughout the draft bill, there's the issue of procurement is mentioned repeatedly, and that's a significant issue. And CARICOM, as we speak, including Barbados, is discussing a draft regional procurement bill. What is your view on how best we can put those kinds of issues into this bill and treat to those issues as they come up in the context of regional procurement in CARICOM?
It is a commendable idea to have those issues incorporated into the legislation. The issue, though, with respect, and I speak, Jamaica is a classic example, of all the issues and the heartache that they themselves have had. And in some cases, as one of my colleagues, we just published some stuff there on corruptions and scandals and through Routledge. And what they found is that I think it comes right down not only to the legislation, because you will probably replicate what has been done in terms of drafting, maybe the Jamaican example. But the problem is that is a cultural problem, that you're trying with all this legislation and so on to find that in a case where they have like offering contracts and all of that stuff, there's no, people do as they feel like and how they feel like, regardless of any legislation there. And sometimes the legislation, because things drag and some people try to, drag it out, what happens is that it takes long to get things done, and then until the next government come in. And that has been the experience out there. There's a belief that the contractor general and all those things have no teeth. You understand? So it would be commendable. And as I said, even here with respect to like contracts and so on, most of the corruption really stems from having contracts being offered. Right now, there's no criteria saying, for example, okay, we hear about X has just gotten this contract. Where is the criteria for the granting of the contract? You do not even have privileged information. So, well, let's see the state-owned enterprise or the various public sector agencies stating that, look, here is all reasons for why we give this contract to X. But as soon as you see people move with their trappings of wealth and their big cars and whatever, the public themselves then start to gossip. And what Sir David is really saying, and I endorse everything he said, is that we have to have transparency and accountability here to bring back trust to everything that you do.
Okay, so if I can just follow on from that, Dr. Aline. So in 2011, and then, and I think 4 years later, in the EU, another regional integration space, there's a considerable body of research that emerged from the communication on fighting corruption in the Union, in the EU. And it looked at the perception of corruption in different countries. And so you had individual national domestic legislation in place, which people were responding to. And then based on the unique culture in each country, there were differing levels of perception of the need for persons to engage in corruption by way of procuring contracts, those kinds of things. And it differed across the region. Some countries were higher, some countries were lower. And so I'm asking you specifically as it relates to your extensive research in the region, how in the context of a regional draft CARICOM procurement bill, given those differing levels of perception of corruption in different countries and a legislative basis that is different equally across countries, what would be your recommendations for Barbados to ensure that we are among those countries where, one, legislatively we are solid, and that two, we take effective measures to change the culture so that the perception of corruption in Barbados, when it does get measured at some point, probably by a researcher, by yourself, is among the lowest in the region?
Well, one of the things is you can have the legislation with all the different procedures, but I always say it comes down to people, mindset, you understand? And one of the things is putting penalties, stiff penalties in place for people who breach these things. And I mean, I've seen the stuff there with the EU and the OECD, and I've done some stuff through the Serious Fraud Office in the UK. And these are issues, these are real issues, the same issues that you're raising, you understand? And one of the things that they've gone along to it is putting penalties for breaches. Because, I mean, you can't legislate for everything as it is going through. We know that you're not supposed to do it. Disclose your conflicts of interest. So you can put all of that in there, having to ensure that people who are making the decisions and who have a conflict recuse themselves away from out of the decision-making process of that. But what happens when a guy says, well, I don't care, or he has a mindset that basically said, I'm going to try to do what I can do. You understand? So what I'm saying here is that we're dealing with a difficult animal, and one that you cannot put in legislation for everything. All we can do is to use what we call moral suasion in terms of getting certain things, but the penalties for breaches have to be at such a level. And as David said, I mean, we have had a little history of having some fairly tidy sums, because the best place to do is to hit it at the pocket or decide whether it's going to be some jail time. You understand, right? Because it's an important part that you have to do in terms. So following with the bill in terms of getting all of those things is not a problem, okay? But I say it is penalties and certainly the code of conduct that has to be done in terms of those things.
Given the hour, I'll accommodate an intervention from the opposition and then from the Honorable Ralph Thorne.
Yeah.
And then we'll conclude our business for the day.
Just, thank you, Mr. Chairman. One quick question, bring us back from Jamaica and the EU. And I asked this question in the lower house, I didn't get a response on it. I ask it again because surely there must be some good reason. And if it's proper, if it's proper and appropriate, perhaps have Sir David in on it as well. I didn't want to delay you earlier, sir. Yeah. But in the schedule, the second schedule, and specified persons in public life, there's a stark omission of judges. I asked about that, and there must be some good reason why they're not included.
You know, this is one I would probably let Sir David answer it, but I will say this, you know, I was reading some time ago the Trinidad experience about those persons, the covered persons and so on, and I think it was Senator Anisette George, if memory serves me correct, started to take issue with those persons who are specified persons and giving a list of all the individuals that might be covered. You understand? I am not sure why the judges are. I don't know if they hold a higher moral authority, you understand? Or is it that they were implicit in the drafting? I don't know. But certainly, based on my research here is that we have to be very careful with some of these stuff, because I remember, Sir David, you just hold your point, Sir David. When Sir David somebody raised and asked why, if a person in the Senate, why they should not be included as it is there, should they be included? You know, we say in auditing that there are two types of independence. Independence in appearance and independence in fact. Independence in fact would suggest that you maintain an unbiased viewpoint during the course of your work free. Yeah, we believe you can do that because you will argue that you can be unbiased. But independence in appearance is the fact that how other observers perceive it. That becomes critical. And when other persons believe that you are not, then there's going to be a problem. Mr. David, if you could help me out with this one, out of this hole.
I suspect that the reason resides in the Constitution. The judges' terms and conditions cannot, under the Constitution, be altered to their disadvantage. No, it would be arguable, and I can see a case being presented not before the same judges, but perhaps maybe a different judge, that what you are seeking to achieve in this is now an imposition, a requirement that they didn't have when they were appointed. And now to try and ask them to comply with this legislation may be seen. And don't forget, it will only have to be proven on the balance of a probability, on balance of probabilities. So it may be that it is more likely than not that it could be construed as an alteration in the terms and conditions of the judges to their disadvantage.
But would that apply to the appointment of judges going forward?
No. If you put it in, you would have to say all judges appointed after the appointed day that is set down in this, that is the date of proclamation. No, it wouldn't apply to new judges, but the current bench would, I think, be entitled to argue that this is an alteration in their terms.
Thank you.
But that was gospel, I said that is probably why.
You're probably right, okay.
I'll allow Senator Franklin a follow-up to buttress the comment of the Leader of the Opposition, and thereafter, the Honorable Ralph Thorne.
Sir, I have a difficulty with that explanation simply because the Constitution of Barbados at Section 94 provides for disciplinary measures for magistrates, permanent secretaries, and people of related grades. They're already taken care of in the Constitution. There's a Public Service Commission. I see at Section 50, it says, this part shall apply without prejudice to the powers conferred upon the appropriate disciplinary authority by the Constitution or other enactment. That's like double jeopardy now. You're going to hit them with the commission, and then you're going to hit them with the Public Service Commission. So my argument is that this legislation should not really be dealing with permanent secretaries, people of related grades, and magistrates, because they are already taken care of in superior legislation, because this does not amend the Constitution.
Under the legislation that you refer to, Public Service Act?
No, it's the Constitution,
The Constitution?
Section 94. it says subject to,
Yeah.
this constitution, powers to, appoint, exercise disciplinary control over public officers is vested in the. Public
Especially service
Commission.
commissions, the various service
Yeah.
commissions. Right. There is nothing in the Constitution or in the operations of the services commissions that requires any public officer at any level to make disclosure about his assets, income, liabilities. That's what this does, you know.
No, I'm talking about the, penalty, dealing with them, they're talking about disciplinary powers under section 50.
Or section 49 makes it clear I'm familiar with it. No, but I'm familiar with it. I have a lot in my head. No, all that Senator Franklin is saying is that the Services Commissions constituted by the Constitution gives them, provides for their authority to promote and inter and discipline the persons who are subject to their authority. So the Police Service Commission can discipline a policeman. The Public Service Commission can discipline a public officer. But in what way is that discipline that they tend to impose at the same level as the specific crimes that are now provided for in Section 51? Here, this Section 51 creates from A to K a new set of offenses which no service commission tries. The service commission try conflict of interest and impose a penalty. Cannot.
Oh, yes, it does.
For
under the
jail?
Public Service Act.
The service commission ever send anybody to jail?
No, I'm telling you, don't send about the jail. But what I'm saying is, this particular section deals with, it says, it's headed, and even though you're going to tell me that the headings don't, are not part of the statute itself, it says, powers of appropriate disciplinary authorities preserved. It is dealing, and it says, this part shall apply without prejudice to the powers conferred upon the appropriate disciplinary authority by the Constitution or other enactments. So this is speaking to the powers that the other disciplinary authorities has in relation to discipline. That is why I ask about it.
And they're saying that they have those powers in relation to discipline. They remain with them. These powers in this part, not that one section, the whole of Part 7, which embodies Clause 51, the powers relating to soliciting, conflict of interest, improperly using your position to benefit third parties, and so on. All of these new offenses.
They're not new for public servants. That's the point I'm making.
Where to set out?
In the Code of Discipline for the public service, almost all of these things are here spelled out. As a matter of fact, the one I wanted to say to Dr. Allen, but I didn't have a lot of time, is that even there's whistleblower provisions in the public service legislation.
Yeah.
Mind you, the first public officer, I know that blew the whistle, he got demoted.
Right, they have this.
But what I'm trying to point is that these offenses are all spelled out, and the Public Service Act, they're so wide, they're even wider than these. Yeah,
Thank you, Dr. Arlene. One of the things you say that caused me some little worry, disturbance even, was when you indicated that some members of the public felt that this would be a talk shop. I must confess to you that disturbed me. Now, I believe the chairman will allow me to say to you that this is definitely not a talk shop. Your very presence here would indicate that it is not. This is a committee of parliament which represents diverse political interests. It is taken as seriously as that. What the public, those people who believe that, what they do not know is that you yourself submitted a quite impressive volume of literature. All of your articles are here, and we have read them, or we are about to read them. Your suggestions, your submissions, the submissions of Sir David's, the submissions yet to come, the public can have our assurance that those submissions will influence the final draft of this legislation, that this is not an academic exercise, it is not a talk shop. We have come to this exercise because we want the public to participate in the outcome, in the final product that this legislation will become. So I just felt that the public, I know you don't feel that way, but you said you subjected the exercise to some tests.
the emissary.
Before you
You're the emissary. And I think before you leave, sorry, Senator Cummings, I think before you leave, the public needs to have that assurance
Yes.
that all of the submissions will come to the committee. In fact, you may have noticed that while suggestions were being made by Sir David in particular, and you as well, the chairman was himself writing, he was making notes, because rest assured, all that is submitted before this committee can be amended to the legislation. The legislation is not final, it is far from final. Look, this event here is rare in the parliamentary history of this country, certainly the recent parliamentary history of this country. When I was downstairs, the journalist asked me if it had ever happened before. I said, frankly, I don't know. But I think this is a rare, it has happened before, but it is rare. It is rare
I
for the
brought the
public.
Assurance Act in 1996. It has
1996, well, it is rare.
Civil
It is a rare
exercise.
occurrence, and obviously you felt welcome coming here. And I think you felt comfortable coming here. But the assurance must be given to the public that this exercise will influence the outcome of the legislation.
But that's
And
very
before you
encouraging.
jump in, Dr. Aline, I just want to take the opportunity to add on to the honorable member from the other place, that through the parliament and through the chair of this committee, all of the stakeholders to whom you referred earlier in your submission have been written to formally in communication and invited to, one, give their written submission, and two, have an opportunity, if they so desire, to sit right where you are sitting and make an oral presentation. And that has been an invitation extended to every stakeholder, every representative body. Some of them have taken up the opportunity so far, others have not done so, but we are confident that they will. And so we here certainly are not engaged in either an exercise in political cosmetology, to use a term that we heard recently, and neither are we engaged in a talk shop. But most importantly, what we are doing here now is treating to an important piece of legislation which is in draft, engaging with the public to have their input so that the challenges that they feel need to be treated with in legislation are done so, and that in so doing, we engage with them. We are live. You are live. Everything you have said here has been broadcast in real time on Facebook Live and on social media and on traditional media. And we will do so over the course of the lifespan of this committee as a commitment, as a signal of our commitment to ensuring that the public trust is regained, not just by our actions or our words, but by the outcome of these proceedings.
That's why I said at the beginning that I commend you all for taking this bold attempt, you with me, in terms of trying to get, but we now need to bring it to fruition.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aline. And I don't want to belabor the point, but let me just remind, we did say at the outset that there are 14 people or entities that have already submitted written submissions. 7 of them have indicated that they intend to do oral submissions, and we fully expect that others will come. And this includes Institute of Chartered Accountants of Barbados, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime in Barbados, MESA, the Office of the Ombudsman is also interested in making a presentation. The Democratic Labour Party has also indicated that they've submitted a written and intend to come and submit a oral, and other political parties as well. And we also have the Financial Intelligence Unit, which is a specialized agency of government that is keen enough to make a representation to us. Ladies and gentlemen, and our listening and viewing public, let me thank you for helping us to get the work of this committee off to a fine start. I'm proposing that we should next meet on Friday, 7th of September at 1:30 in the afternoon. I know it may not be convenient for all of us, but being mindful of the timeline and the numbers of people who are going to be making contributions, we feel it's important to press on so long as we can get a quorum. So I'd like to propose that we adjourn to continue our business on the 7th of September. Do we have a motion? Yes. So moved and seconded.
And seconded.
Yes. Okay. Dr. Aline, there's a motion that we should also accord you with the highest accolade in the parliamentary tradition.
I always wanted to be in here.
Minister Ford, you wanted the floor? Oh, that's what I thought. Thank you very much. This meeting of the Select Committee stands adjourned until Friday, 7th of September at 1:30 in the afternoon.